Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. It's really good to have you all here this evening at the 2021 Lenten Speaker Series at St. Paul's. Would you please join me in a prayer, please? A prayer written by J. Philip Newell. Peace where there is war, healing where there is hurt, memory where we have forgotten the other, vision where there is violence, light where there is madness, sight where we have blinded each other, comfort where there is sorrow, tears where there is hardness, laughter where we have missed life's joys, laughter when we remember the joy. Amen. Well, again, welcome to the 2021 Lenten Speaker Series. If you've joined us for the past 4 weeks, you will have heard about journeys. The theme of our Lenten series is Journey Together. And the theme has been brought about because of the incredible journey that you and I have been on together over the last year as a church, as citizens, as a people, as a common humanity, as religious people, as spiritual people. We've all been on a journey together. And we thought that there are no better people equipped to talk about the journey, the nuances of the journey, the beauty and the difficulty of journeys, other than artists. And so for the past 4 weeks, you have heard from artists who have offered different perspectives into their take on the theme of the journey. And tonight is no different. To help us in this conversation tonight is Dave Coogan. Dave is a member of St. Paul's. He also has his own ministry in the prison system, helping people find their own voices. He helps them tell their own stories, the stories of incarcerated people, people whose paths we may never cross. So Dave is very familiar with journeys and helping others explore theirs. So I'm glad Dave is here tonight to be with us on this particular journey. If you have questions tonight, I invite you to put them into the Q&A, and that way Dave and I can know that they're there and weave them into the conversation. If you'd like to make a donation, there will be a link in the chat. And know that the proceeds, the donations will go to support this speaker series and future series. So again, I'm so glad you've been with us over these past 4 weeks on our journey together. And it's such a great joy to welcome you here in the final presentation of our Lenten speaker series. Dave, it's all yours.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, everyone. I am so pleased tonight to introduce our speaker. He is Douglas Powell, or as he's known on stage, Roscoe Burnems. He is Richmond's first Poet Laureate. He is a published author, a spoken word artist, a comedian, an educator, a father, and a husband who has dedicated his craft to entertaining and enlightening. As a career poet, he has become a National Poetry Slam champion, 2-time Southern Regional finalist, TEDx youth speaker, and the star of the first poetry and comedy special streaming on Amazon Prime entitled Traumedy. And I also happen to know that he is the recipient of a wonderful letter from Tim Kaine, former Governor Tim Kaine, former Vice Presidential candidate Tim Kaine, of acknowledging his achievements, and especially that of Poet Laureate for Richmond. So welcome, Roscoe.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. It's good to have you here. As Charlie said earlier in the introduction, we have been on a journey as a church. We have been trying to reconceive of what it means to journey during this time of COVID-19. And we know that you are no stranger to journeying. You are an artist who, when you start to write, when you start to perform, when you start to engage with a group of people, you are on a journey of discovery. And I know that you've encountered some epiphanies along the way. I mean, in your poetry, about whether you're writing about toxic masculinity, whether you're writing about race or whiteness in America, you are diving right into the thicket of the hardest questions that we need to be asking. And so I just wanted to frame that, as I know you're going to share some of your work with us. That journey from a difficult place of not knowing where you are to this encounter where you find an insight. So let's hear some of your poetry. Let's give us a little taste. Give us a little taste. Get us right into the thick of it. We're going to hear some poems, everybody, from Roscoe. He might preface them. I don't know what he's going to do. You never know, but he'll give us a taste of his poetry, and then we'll have a chance to dialogue about that as we move through the evening.
Awesome, and again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I think I'll start off with this kind of a universal message in the idea of God. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. So when I'm speaking these words, this isn't poetic rhetoric. This is me trying to get back to the sentence from which I came. Love. Love is 2 or 3 different, more concrete emotions all rolled into one mass, combined with flesh and speech to create man. Because in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was love, because God is love. So I love you the way God does, like forever, like no end, because God, or love, is infinite. And we were made in this image of infinite love. So in a search to find myself, not only had I never left, but I have been looking in the eye of I the entire time, just waiting on me to speak the words so that God in me could be revealed. So this is self-love. It's what you need first before you go looking for God in someone else. So here's some questions. Like if God sees all, how can love be blind? Ooh. Or if I'm looking for a true love, does that mean I'm looking for a true God? If in fact God is love, or if God is love and this is true, how come we look up to find God, but we fall into love? When do we learn to separate the two? Or if we make love, have we formed God inside the room? Is this the never before explained immaculate conception of God, an intercourse of universes colliding, planet first, emitting bursts of energy so far beyond known to flesh and bone that we put it on a throne? I have only known love to be that powerful. So it changed everything, y'all. Even changed the way I pray. Like, dear love, I guide you. Guide me as only you could. So many people mistreat you, mistreat the vessels in which you will contain, because they are told to fear God, which makes them fear love. So they go through life never being able to understand God, or never being able to feel love. Even church told me to fear God, and I asked you why, how? How do I love you and fear you at the same time? So I had to be born again, right? Because I had been dying to find you. Every suicide attempt had been me just dying to find you. And often we are too far gone. We're so far gone that we can't even see where God is anymore. And this is why we look for love in all the wrong places. So in hopes that everyone finds their one true God, in love's name, pray. Amen.
I'm going to amen to that right away. And I wanted to, ask you something about this in terms of where you came into this discovery of God and love. And I wanted to know if you would be willing to talk about your mother, because in one of your previous poems, Agnostic, you did a beautiful rendering of her faith and how she taught you to believe in something bigger than yourself. And I think along the way, you must have absorbed something, at least the way that poem is written, something of her love. Now, how did you learn to pray this way, Roscoe?
So I grew up Christian. I grew up Baptist for the most part. My entire childhood. I didn't really start to identify as something outside of being Christian until I was in my maybe 20, 21, something like that. So I had been, steeped heavily in the church for a very long time and in the Word of God. I mean, look, church every Sunday, Bible study on Wednesdays, vacation Bible school. Like I was in it. I was in a prayer group in high school, and in your journey, you're allowed to ask questions, or you should be. You should be allowed to ask questions in your journey, especially as a youth, right? Because that's the time where we're the most curious about the world around us and about the human experience. So I had a lot of questions. The older I got, the more I read, I had a lot of questions. And I wasn't always able to get those answers from the religious leaders, the pastors that I had at the time. Not even from my mother all the time, who was also very heavily steeped in her belief in her faith, but was not as very well read about her faith, to no fault of her own. I think sometimes people are kind of on autopilot, right? They go to church every Sunday, and that's kind of what it is for them. They go home and they do whatever else during the week. And so I think a lot of people are kind of like that. And that wasn't particularly enough for me. Like, if I was going to be invested in this thing that determined not only the trajectory of my life, but my afterlife as well, there were some things that I needed answered. And so I went off to find those things on my own. And I feel like, for me, what I found what works for me is kind of where I am now. And that required some level of self-discovery, in addition to tackling some very tough conversations about faith.
Did it involve getting over the fear of God or the fear of love? Yeah,
that was always an issue with me, like the idea that to fear God. And I'll be honest, you don't find it as much in New Testament as you do in Old Testament. Old Testament is very fire and brimstone, right? But New Testament is not as much. But the idea of fearing this person, this omniscient being that was supposed to that loves me and it created me and wants to see me thrive and do well, and the idea of fearing that was very foreign and very confusing to me. And I think that was one of the first divides I had from traditional church and traditional religion, than where I ended up. And it made me think about my own parents, my journey with my mom, right? She's somebody I reverence. She's somebody I deeply respect and for a while idolized, right? Because she was the only parent that I know that I thought that she was a brilliant parent, did a great job raising us. I never feared my mother. Ever. Never feared her. And so the idea that this person that I love and reverence is someone that I also have to fear. Fear is a very strong word. It didn't sit right with me. And so for that kind of led me into kind of taking God outside of the box that we often put God in.
Well, and I can tell just by the way you give a poem, and we're going to hear some more in a minute, I know, that you're fearless. There's no fear in the way you deliver a poem. You're comfortable in your own self, your own skin, your own performance, and it's very loving and very generous. Even when you're being critical of things that we need to all pay more attention to, you're being very generous, I feel. How did you come into this style of slam poetry?
When I first fell in love with storytelling and things of that nature, I really fell in love with music first. So that's kind of what caught my attention. And it wasn't just the musicality. It wasn't just what it did for me sonically. It was the lyricism. It was the storytelling. It was the message. And like I said, I grew up in a very very, very Baptist house. My grandmother and her sisters had a singing group, and they would tour through all the churches throughout Virginia and down south. And so they were practice. I grew up in my grandmother's house. They would practice. And so I was in it. I was sitting there. I was heavily invested in I knew all the songs. I knew what order they came in. I could have been their manager. I knew their whole set, everything. So that's where the love of writing came in for me. I wanted to be a songwriter. I started out trying to write gospel music, that kind of thing. And then later fell in love with poetry and just other forms of storytelling, hip hop and other forms of music and that kind of thing. So that kind of that actually kind of journeyed me into spoken word. When I graduated high school, and I had this like thirst for poetry as a performance art, like seeing people get on stage and read what they wrote was a really foreign concept when I was in high school, but I started to see it more often. And I was like, I want to do that. That's what I would do. And so after graduating, I would find like open mics and different venues where they would have poets come through and read. And I just kind of hit the ground running after that. And that style kind of leaned more so into what I was hearing in my own head, right? When I was writing it down, I was hearing, you're hearing the words, right? And you're writing down your own lyrics. This is kind of how it came off for me. So to see that happening in real time spoke to me as an artist.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you want to speak to us some more as an artist? You want to?
Awesome, I would love to. Thank you so much.
Speak another piece right now.
So this piece is entitled "Art of God." Yeah. So when my favorite poet said that spoken word was the art of getting to know God for a living, what I heard was art will reveal the reality of God. Spoken word, psalms of today, songs of yesterday, poised pain in prose, scripted tablets to Facebook pages, pages of prayer-pasted blogs, pontificated performed pieces of God's agenda. I never believed that God had agenda. I think God is art, purest form of self-expression, love in love with the idea of, thus making self-creation the great I am finished into a complete sentence structured to conjure images. I don't think that God is a poet. I think that God is poetry, evolution in haiku, immaculate conception conjugated by consonants and vowels, the all-knowing, all-spark of alliteration transformed, transcending formations leads me to think that my transgender family be trying to get closer to God, the way we all are. Like, are we all made in the image of God? Or isn't poetry all about imagery? I mean, who is anyone to say the poem they see in the mirror isn't the poem they were meant to be? But if God's got a gender, well, then God must have a race. Now, I can race to conclude that God is Black and looks like me, but if God looks like me, how can God look like you? I told a white woman, I saw God in her, and she said she saw the same thing in me. I don't think that God is a painter. I think God be paint. Graffiti portraits of divinity, a mixed media mastermind mastering itself as a craft, crafting neon, neo-pastel personalities, a sketch of the future, visions of a sketchy past, fingers paint brushing problems on blank paper so we can draw our own conclusions. But listening to our own voices, we sing out segregation and broken down in the beginning to a sample and a soundbite, remixed into religion, a pale skin and beard, or a dreadlock rock star prophet, Allah and auto-tune, Christ chopped and screwed by man. God isn't a singer. God is a song written by dance and vice versa. Verse, then chorus, choreographed chords by pliés, life-saving cliches from step fall change whose measures resemble meteors, whose silent meditations sound like melodies, who started time with a tick-tock like metronomes, popped in a pulse, locked us into life, put the world on its axis from a clockwise backspin. God is a four-part harmony, heard from four corners of the earth, an R&B run over a rock ballad solo with a guitar made out of stars who simultaneously boom bap the Big Bang Theory, our creator, whose art is heaven. Hallowed be thy frame, thy kingdom sung, spun into Genesis. God is art, and we are its masterpiece.
Wow. Man, I could listen to you all night. I'm just thinking about that. God is the paint, God is the song. And I like the way you concluded that it's these different images in that dialogue you have with the woman, but it's also the different songs that we hear and the lyrics we say. I once had a guy in prison that I got to know pretty well when we were working on our book together, writing our way out. And he told me when he converted to Islam, it was a relief to him to hear in the Quran the words, God made the people and made them different so that we would know our differences. And he had struggled. This is a black man that had struggled all his life with racism in ways that were traumatic for him. And when he read that, he understood that who he was and how he came to be was not a problem, as he always thought it had been. And I like the way I forgot exactly how you phrased it, but that line about a trans family, I don't know if you're referring to yourself or just a trans family, but it speaks to the question of differences and how we understand this paint, this material of our shared lives.
So over time, especially in the poetry community, that the poetry community, what I love about it is that it's been very accepting of a lot of different lifestyles and a lot of different identities. And that, I know it's still like difficult for some, but I think that what I found in this community of writers is that they understand that everyone's journey is different, everyone's identity is very different, and that's okay. And that wasn't always something that I had got in the churches that I grew up in. And so it was wild to me at first to be in these spaces where people were just like, very accepting of just whoever and however they identify. And I had some very negative viewpoints when I first kind of came into all this. And, and I have to own up to that. I got to take accountability for that. The things that I've said and the views that I've had in regards to like the LGBTQ plus community. Growing up in a household that was very, very traditionally, Christian. But like breaking away, but in asking more questions and in having this own personal journey, you understand that one, that we're really not that different, right? The human experience is the human experience. We all experience love and heartbreak and grief and rejection. And we all want to be loved for who we are. And so I had to really like do some soul searching, and there's a lot of apologizing to people who are for having such views and having such opinions about people's lifestyles, and then realize that these people want to be loved and appreciated for who they are. And so now now I have trans friends, and I'm like, I couldn't even imagine being that person that I was 20 years ago now. You know what I mean? But it's a part of the journey, right? It's part of how we evolve as a people, and making atonement is a part of that.
Well, if you're in confessional mode, I'll go confessional mode. I had the same limited attitudes when I was growing up. I didn't grow up in a conservative Baptist tradition either, but I said those slurs and thought those thoughts before I knew and could have the experiences of the diverse world we live in. One of the things that I thought that might be interesting for you to reflect on at this point, since I did take the liberty of looking up some of your other videos and listening to some of your poems, because once you go, by the way, everybody, if you're listening, when you go down this rabbit hole of listening to Roscoe Burnems videos on YouTube, it's going to be hard to get out. You're not going to get any other work done that day. But you had a great piece on toxic masculinity that I liked a lot, because the way you connected it to being a father these days. And could you, I don't know if you were planning on reading the piece about A Kiss from My Son, but could you connect what you're talking about now about how you evolved in your journey and understanding the broader experience of diversity of gender and sexuality with your understanding of becoming a man and learning how to be a father?
Well, I'll tell you, just in general, fatherhood changed everything for me. And I became a father fairly early. I had my daughter when I had just turned 20 when she was born. And then my son, we had 10 years later. So I have a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old. But being a father changed everything, because, when we speak of, I know that, often in these spaces, we speak of unconditional love, right? And if there's ever a place where you should or would have unconditional love, it's for your children. I couldn't imagine a world or a time where I would disown or distance myself from my kids because of a lifestyle choice or because of who they loved or whatever, however you want to frame it. And so I again, having some very limited views, some very ignorant viewpoints growing up in my youth, versus now journeying as an adult and now being a father and having and raising kids, knowing that in my mind, there's a chance that they'll be gay, or, they'll be queer in some way. They'll be trans potentially. Like I don't know. But I had to start picking myself apart and being like, well, if that's the case, is that gonna cause me to like distance myself from my child? And the answer was no way. There was no way in the world. I love my children unconditionally, no matter what they decide to be and how they decide to identify or what they decide to do with their life or whatever. So, in making that a broader thing, it's like I should be extending the same amount of care and love to everyone, right? And it's like, and then you start to see how trivial some of these arguments are about identity or love or whatever, and how small they really are within the human experience. So having my son, and then the other part of that, the basis behind "Kiss My Son," the poem, is really affection. But how affection can kind of come off as emasculating. And that's just something in general that I wanted as a child. I wanted more affection. And my father wasn't really around, so I didn't get that from, the paternal side. All right. But even with my mom was very hard on us because she was a single mom and she felt like she had to be really hard. She was raising 2 boys. She felt like she had to be really hard with us, very stern with us, because she wanted us to be more masculine. And so the idea is that masculinity, it exists in the ability to be stoic or emotionless. And that's unfair. That's unfair to my human experience, because I'm a human and I want to be loved and I want to be held and I want to be, I want to be told that people care about me, and I want people to show that. My love language is touch. You know what I mean? Like I want to be hugged and kissed and all that kind of stuff. And so as a parent, it's like, I'm not going to withhold that from my children. Not even, obviously not my daughter, right? Because that's more familial, but like, definitely not my son either. My son is a whole person. He when he falls, he it hurts, and he wants somebody to hug him and tell him it's going to be better. So you have to extend that same amount of affection to your kids, regardless of their gender identity or what their journey looks like.
I just love the way you share so straightforwardly and vulnerably what it really means to be a man. Because we get caught up, like you said, in these ideas of masculine as stoic or unemotional or not crying or heaven forbid even touching your male child, right, or touching another man to embrace in a hug. We get so caught up in these things, and they really are limiting in our journeys as men. And I would think that they affect the others too in the community. Nobody benefits from a closed off individual who can't really
it hinders your relationships and your ability to create healthy relationships when you don't feel like you're allowed to be fully human, right? And be able to extend that type of affection or receive that type of affection.
Yeah. I just checked in with the Q&A, and I realized somebody asked a question that might relate to what you're on to talking about right now. As Poet Laureate, the first Poet Laureate of Richmond, raising these kind of issues in your work in the community, what has been your response so far? Or maybe back up and just tell me, how do you see your role as Poet Laureate, and what have you done to bring open these questions through poetry?
I'll take just a step back before Poet Laureate, right? My mission statement as an artist has always been to propose difficult conversations and potential solutions, right? My whole thing has been, this is a conflict, but here's where we find resilience in it. Here's how we move forward, at least from my perspective. So that's always been a large part of who I am, whether that's masculinity or mental health or racism. That's always been my goal. So that has not changed since being awarded this Poet Laureate position. It's given me now like a bigger platform in the city to now create more challenging conversations. Yeah. That now everybody can kind of be involved in. And talk about how we move forward as a community, or create spaces where, if we do have people who are marginalized in some way, shape, or form, how do we start to build a more equitable future for them through art?
And what's the reception been like so far?
you know what, honestly, overwhelming. For the most part, it's been very, very warm. You know what I mean? People have been very like receptive towards it and very supportive. I think we're approaching a different time where, you know, you're not getting as much pushback when we talk about marginalized communities. That's not to say that there isn't any pushback, but I don't think it's as I don't think it's as bad. And so, you know, hopefully that continues. And so the goal as Poet Laureate is to continue to have these conversations and continue to do the poems and continue to educate the youth, which is a large part of my mission as an artist, because that's the generation rising, right? And if we want to start to break away from old habits, old structures, old traditions, old ways of thinking, less informed ways of thinking, you gotta grab the youth who are going to be, you know, the change makers for this, you know, the upcoming generation.
Can I ask a question? I saw Brian Stevenson at the Richmond Forum a couple of nights ago, and he talked about truth-telling spaces, creating truth-telling spaces and proximity, being near those who are experiencing hurt and oppression. And I hear you as creating truth-telling spaces. Like I just feel like that's what you're about. And can you talk a little bit about your work with kids? And what do you hope they hear in you?
My goal in working with youth is to present art in a way that I would have wanted when I was about their age. I largely work with like middle and high school kids, and there was a lot of soul searching for me. And I struggled really hard with like depression and suicide ideation and suicide attempts. And it's still, you know, it's still kind of a struggle, you know, even going into adulthood. You know, mental health is one of those things where it's a constant fight, you know, and a constant act of resilience. So it's like, but kids need the tools. Kids need the tools in order to be able to express what they're feeling and be able to find outlets and find ways to create these like therapeutic processes for themselves so they can make healthier decisions. So my goal is to use art, or particularly poetry and performance poetry, as a way to get these kids who didn't have the tools before, didn't have the words before to articulate themselves, what their experiences are, and to help them build their own narratives and share that with the world, right? Like we don't know these experiences, these things are happening until somebody says it. So poetry, fortunately, has been this outlet where we get to kind of share this with the world, and they're willing to tune in.
Yes, and I'm again, because I went down that rabbit hole earlier this week. There was one poem you did about one of the kids you worked with at a school. He was a young boy, I think 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah, Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. I knew it started with a J. I didn't want to get the name wrong though, but you described in this poem how you greeted him and ended each day with a hug, and then he would start to reciprocate and learn not to see you as or any authority as a threat, but that a simple display of a greeting and welcome was okay.
Yeah. You know, when I was teaching full time, and during that time I was working with elementary kids, and so yeah, so like, and it's at their comfort level, but like sometimes that's the only hug they're gonna get in the day. So, you know, and who doesn't like a good hug? You know what I mean? Like I just want my kids to feel like they're welcome and that they're loved when they're in my classroom. I do it with my older kids too. And so sometimes all they want is a dap or a little fist bump. Some kids, you know, will be like, hey, bring it in, bro. You know what I mean? So you got to meet them where they are. But everyone wants to feel loved and appreciated, right? And I want all of my students to always feel loved and appreciated when they're in a space with me, right? I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel loved. I want them to feel, you know, welcome. And so yeah, so like, but you know, the first time he was really standoffish. He did not know how to take me. And he was a new kid. It was middle of the year. And then, you know, we got to know each other, and he became one of my favorites, and I became his favorite teacher. He would like want to sit with me at lunch, even when he wasn't in my class anymore. Like he would see me before he got on the bus, and he would give me a big hug. You know what I mean? And this is a kid who was 7 years old, gold fronts, like just very hard exterior. And it's because, you know, that's the environment he grew up in. He's 7. He doesn't have much control over that. He's just kind of, he's a product. He's a product of what what he sees around him. And unless you show them something different, so you show kids something different, they're gonna respond in the way that they know, or in the actions they've seen from whoever's around them. So I think it's, as adults, it's important that we be responsible and be accountable and be, not to be too on the nose, but be the change that you want to see. Shouts out to Gandhi for that quote.
Or just to stop being a product and be a producer, which is
Look at you, you're a poet too.
Just a little bit. I'm at the foot of your footstool, perhaps. Speaking of which, give us another one. Come on.
Roscoe said he wanted to give us 3 poems, and we haven't let him do that, right?
Of course, yeah. Let's turn it up.
I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. So once you get me talking, I am going.
Yeah.
Okay. So last one, and I know this poem came up a little earlier. It was mentioned a little earlier, and I think if we're talking about journeying and spirituality, then I would be remiss if I didn't do this particular poem. So this piece is this piece in my book is actually called "The Truth About God," but online you'll see it often referred to as agnostic. My mother has a heart full of batteries. An active morning leaves her drained. It leaves her out of breath. She stays plugged into the bed through most of the afternoon, and recharging most days, it takes all evening. She uses these moments to read scripture, talk to Jesus. My mother owes her life to her faith. Would often ask me to take her to church on Sundays. She remembers all the times she's died, when resurrection was a defibrillator, laying hands on her. She thanks God for all the transformations, but never the doctors. I had once watched this documentary about how often religious texts get doctored, how holy books undergo transformations. I read a lot about scripture. Found there were 14,800 differences between the original Bible and its most modern version. That there's no mention of Christ's return in its earliest rendition, that the similarities between Christianity, Egyptology are uncanny. And most religious holidays linked to Christ are pagan, have nothing to do with Christ at all. After all of this, I became agnostic, not atheist. I didn't choose to believe in nothing, not that there's anything wrong with that. I just chose to stop looking through the pigeonhole that is religion. Felt a huge word like God was too big to put in a chapter book. And I use terms like the universe now. I don't pray as much as I meditate. I feel like if Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses didn't need a Bible, Quran, or Torah, then maybe I should follow suit. Well, at one point, I felt like I had to educate my mother on everything that I had learned, right? Truth about King James, religious fear-mongering, the origin of Satan. And since then, my mother has stopped asking me to take her to Sunday service. Go figure. Says that she's praying for me, never specifies what she's hoping is going to happen. She thinks I'm an atheist. She has never heard the word agnostic. And I was starting to think there were 14,800 differences between my mother and me. But when the surgeon said there was no mention of her return, I responded like scripture, "O ye of little faith," realized the similarities between her and I are uncanny. That the little bit of gospel I have inside is pagan, had nothing to do with Christ at all. It was after watching cardiac arrest leave her chest split like a Red Sea, after cancer had been a nail in our family's palm, and every man in her life be one Judas after another. These things made me doubt the Lord, but overcoming them made her believe in God more. And maybe she's blind, or maybe I'm blind, or maybe faith is about being blind and trusting everything that you feel. She calls it God. I call it the universe. She found it in a book. I found it in her. Look, I've learned too much about the Bible and I always believe in it, but she's gone through too much in life not to. My mother passes down the same Bible she swears kept her alive, and I'm going to read it all the way through one day when they add a chapter about my mother. I am agnostic, not atheist. There are times I've seen too much to believe in God, and I have watched my mother be God too much not to believe in something.
That is so beautiful, man. I hope, has she heard that poem? Have you shared that with her?
Yes, recently. She's heard it recently.
Okay, good. Because, you know, that's
beautiful.
that's such a, I mean, really, because I think you nailed the essence of what it means to be agnostic. You've seen in her life, her faith. You're not claiming it for yourself, but if if she has it and you know it, then what more proof do you need?
Right.
It's at this level, at our level, in the human level of our interaction here on earth, then she's embodying that spirit. That's really touching.
Thank you.
Charlie?
Church. It's church. That sounds like church to me, and that's good. I mean, and I want to meet. You know, it's anyway. I loved it. I love that.
I think
I want you to come and preach my Easter sermon, because that's what I want my Easter sermon to be, right there.
I'm there. You just I'm there.
Come on.
I think that, you know, over time, I think what we learn, and no matter what your personal belief is that it's really about relationship, right? Your faith is based on relationship. And so, you know, I know sometimes, like, at the surface level of that poem, it sounds kind of like I'm just distancing myself from Christianity, and that's not really what it's about. It's more so about, like, finding it's more about the relationship between me and my mother, and watching and kind of being in awe of the relationship that she has with her own faith and her own spiritual journey, and how that sparks something in me, so that even though I'm not necessarily carrying the label that I may have in my youth, there's still something in me that believes in something much higher than myself. And that's important. That's always going to be important to me, regardless of what I call it.
To me, it sounds like you're holding Christianity accountable.
I like that too. Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's...
I've never phrased it that way, but I like the way that I like that. Yes.
Yeah, you're holding us accountable. You're holding Christianity accountable for what it says it's going to be about. And then what you do, and what I think biblical interpreters do, who have imagination and a sense of enlightenment, is they teach us how to read scripture in ways that make sense and are relevant to our own context. And that's exactly what you've done. The Red Sea, the differences in interpretation. I mean, you've just helped us interpret scripture. Thank you.
It also,
I never even thought about it like that, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, doesn't it also speak to the necessary fuel you need, or the food you need, to keep writing poetry? Because the agnostic is doubting that there can be anything known about the knowledge of God. Not saying God, I have proof God doesn't exist. The agnostic is questioning the limits of our human understanding to know, gnosis as wisdom or knowledge.
Exactly.
And by keeping it open, you're giving yourself more opportunity to search for that knowledge.
Right.
But what I admire about the poem and about the way you've gone about your work is the humility with which you approach that, such that even though your mother is coming from a different perspective, maybe a more traditional Baptist perspective, but I noticed early in the poem you said, whatever the health condition was, she thanks God, but not the doctor. And I thought that was very touching, because in thanking God, she's holding on to the same mystery. She could get the actual explanation of what the doctor did, but forget them. It's God that did it.
Right.
And she likes to have that connection that's mysterious and open-ended, to knowing exactly how God worked through those doctors.
Right. She does. I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. She wants that. Like, she doesn't want to know. Even now, I got to take my mom to the doctor all the time, and she doesn't want to know all these, like, you know, this is what this medicine is, prescription or whatever. In her mind, she prayed to be healed, and this is what God did, and that's what she wants, and that's what she needs, and I think that that's okay.
Does she still pray for you? Is she still hoping for something?
Oh, her and my grandma both. They said that is how they greet me. I was praying for you the other day, and then.
Hey, I've got another question from the audience that is appropriate here. This was the first one that came in. She asks, you speak of afterlife. How do you, and you as an artist, envision this experience?
The experience of the afterlife?
Yeah, how do you imagine the afterlife?
I don't. And I think that, and not to be, hopefully this doesn't come off the wrong way. I think it's arrogant for anyone to imagine what the afterlife should be, could be like.
Yeah.
I think that's just, and I think that's not like an attack on anybody. I think that humans in general, I think humans as a species are arrogant. I think we know everything. I think we think we know everything all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a flaw in the human existence. And so I am trying to break away from that, but I don't even pretend to even fathom what the afterlife could or would be like.
Yeah, I hear you.
Well, I agree about the arrogant part. I've always said that the thing that scares me most in any kind of classroom is people who already think they know the answers and need to be proven wrong, because there's no room for dialogue there. Once somebody is committed, and I could take it out of the classroom, I could bring it to my classes at the jail. It's the same thing everywhere I go. People that are closed to inquiry are threatening to me because they don't have the humility or the vulnerability to learn. They've put up the wall already. And so I like the way your poetry opens up those walls, whether it's through, and you're very accessible in the way you do it, in a timely way. I think we need to be talking about the limits of masculinity and the structural racism that's blocking our collective freedom in this society.
So Roscoe, about race, what was the time of the protests like for you? I mean, where did you feel like you felt called to be a part of that experience and that conversation?
So this time around was a little different because COVID was a thing. And so I didn't find myself kind of in the streets as much as here, but I went to a couple of protests and a couple of events kind of centered around police brutality and equity and Black Lives Matter, things of that nature. Like I found myself at a handful of events last year, but not as active as I'd probably been, in other cases. But I think that the mood, the kind of the feeling in the air, particularly this time around, was just kind of like exhaustion. I think people are really exhausted. You know what I mean? Like I remember being at a march when Freddie Gray was murdered. I remember being at an event in honor of Sandra Bland. I remember being at an event when Tamir Rice was murdered. When I remember being at VCU for a protest when the Lord, what's the gentleman's name? When the whole Skittles and iced tea.
Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon. The problem is there's too many names to keep up with. Yes. So I remember being and speaking at an event when Trayvon was murdered. And so then at that point in time, people were very angry. And I don't even know if there were really like a lot of solutions, but we wanted people to know that this was something that shouldn't happen, was not going to go, without some civil unrest. And by the time now that you get to like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the list of other names that have come after them, people are exhausted. It's cumbersome. It's a lot to deal with. And to know that for me personally, as somebody who is a Black man in America, and that this is very much a reality for me. I was 18. One of the times I was pulled over. I say pulled over, but I was walking. I used to work at the Richmond Coliseum. I was walking home. I lost my ride, so it was like 2 a.m. We had just finished, and I was walking home from downtown to North Henrico, which is a very long walk. And police pulled me over. Like they stopped me while I was walking. They handcuffed me. They They ran my ID because they thought that I looked like somebody that they were looking for. Now, mind you, they came up from behind me, so I don't know how much I looked like that person. But that was the process, you know what I mean? And I was out there on a curb, handcuffed, after not doing anything at all, for about an hour. I was handcuffed for about an hour while they ran my ID. And then had to finish walking home after all that, right? And so it's like, I had no, like that was a happy ending. Like that was the happy ending for me, because we've seen stuff like that play out where people don't walk away from that. Oscar Grant was murdered in a subway station. You know what I mean? After he got off the train, he was already handcuffed and he was face down. So he wasn't resisting arrest. Like he wasn't like fighting or doing anything violent, and he still got shot in the back. You know what I mean? So like, it's not, you know, it's like, so knowing that these things can be a very real thing is frightening. So I have to live with that and be comfortable with that, living in that type of fear every day that I leave my house.
Yes. And I remember the poem, The Metaphysics of Whiteness, or The Metaphysics of White Privilege. Was that the name of it? I know you don't have time to do the whole piece now because we're coming to the end, but can you give us a few lines of that share with us your thoughts about how white privilege came about and how it worked in that situation?
So I'll do the very beginning. So if a tree falls in a forest and the people inside the forest claim not to hear it, doesn't make a sound. What if the tree was rosewood burning? What if the tree were a dark shade of brown? Would it matter then? Or are you one of those all trees matter type people? What if the tree didn't just fall? What if the tree were chopped down? And what if the axe was targeting that tree? What if that tree only made up 13% of the forest, but for some reason made up 60% of the caskets? What if that tree tried to comply and still died? Is his death still a death? Is death a death when no one recognizes the life?
That says it all. And if any of you listening were ever in a philosophy class where you opened up those metaphysics questions, you know, the metaphysics, the study of what exists and why it exists and how it came to exist. And if the tree falls in a forest and nobody hears it, did it fall? Those are the questions you're raising, really in a clever and insightful way about reality.
Just to unpack, I know we're getting close to the end. I promise I won't keep you too long. But just to kind of unpack that a little bit, the idea behind that is that a lot of the questions a lot of the responses you get to conversations about race, especially now by the time we get to 2021, is why are they always playing the race card? Why are all these questions about race coming up now? Oh, you know, and it's like, it's coming up now for you, because now you can't run away from it. It's in media all the time, right? It's in media all the time now in 2021. This is not just coming up for me. My experience is different. I have been dealing with this since the 80s. Like, you know, I was born in 86. I have been dealing with the idea of this in the late 80s, 90s, 2000s. There's a long list of names that are close to me and things that we've seen on TV and in media or whatever that I know about in regards to police brutality and racism and Black death. People now, mainstream media is now covering these things. And so now people are having these conversations more often, and now they're exhausted, or now they're tired of seeing it, and they're tired of having it. Me too, but I've been talking about it for 30 years. You know what I mean? So like, our experiences are different. And the issue is that people have been able to separate themselves from it. And there is a privilege in that. There's a privilege in being able to separate yourself from other people's experiences. And it isn't just white privilege. As a straight male, I've had the privilege of not thinking about hate crimes against people who are in the LGBTQ community, right? But that's the privilege that I have. I've had that privilege to be able to separate myself from that. And I have to like own up to that, right? And then use that privilege to be a decent ally so that those people also have a fair and safe and equitable future.
And the whole ally thing, say so much. We're winding up, but I before everybody got on, we kind of have a little chat before these things. And I asked Roscoe if there were any topics that were off limits like, is there anything you don't want me to ask you or anything you don't want to talk? He was like, nope, as long as you don't mind an honest answer. So here we go, Roscoe. What do you want to say to the church?
Ooh, oh, what kind of time we got? We got a lot of time, but
No, we do not.
No. You know, I think, you know, what's the golden rule, right? And the golden rule is to treat others as you would want to be treated. If we're talking about you know, race, we're talking about sexuality and identity, just know that those people's experiences, just the experiences of people in marginalized communities, are going to be a little harder than some other people's. And so if you want to be treated fairly, if you want to be treated with respect, you want to be treated nicely, kindly, you want to have access to all the things that this world has to offer, then you also have to extend that same amount of care to other people without conditions.
That's love. That's the love. And if you need to journey to get there, if you need to journey to get to that understanding of love, that's a journey worth taking.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Roscoe. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
This is awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, Roscoe, this has been so great. And thank you. I mean, again, if you want to buy Roscoe's art, there's a link in the chat, and please go and support him in this way. I wish we could talk longer. Dave, thank you for hanging out and for doing this. I mean, this has been so much fun. 5 weeks we've been hanging out on Thursdays.
Every Thursday night, and this is the last one.
I know. Sarah, go you back there. Can you pop up too?
Come on, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah. So Sarah's been behind the scenes kind of driving the airplane. And Sarah, thank you. All right, you all. Well, it's time to bring this to a close for this year. Thank you all, and for everybody who's participated, everybody who's supported. This has been a dream come true to talk about spirituality and the arts. And I hope it has borne fruit beyond our imagining. So take care. And if you want to know anything else more about St. Paul's, about the services, Holy Week that's ahead, Easter Day services that are ahead, please stay tuned. stpaulsrva.org. There's a list of all of our services and events there. Have a beautiful, beautiful night.
Peace, everybody. All right. Good night, Roscoe. Good night, Charlie.
I don't think they stayed on like. Are we still all on there? Is everybody?
I think Dave
he's got to.
Yeah, he goes to dinner.
Roscoe, are you back there?
Okay.
That